Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by echoing your words of appreciation to our two colleagues, Rob Andrews and Mike Conaway, who have done a stellar job in leading their able members, and frankly, what I think is something we all should take a great deal of pride in. We're deeply in their debt. But as you noted, Mr. Chairman, we have a ways to go, and particularly with the final touches on this piece of legislation, I want to add my words of welcome as well to our distinguished panelists. I noted to our former two secretaries, Messrs. De Leon and Chu, this is kind of like a personnel subcommittee reunion, only because we're on a different topic. They let us come into the big house here. We're usually in 2212, but it's good to see them back as well, and always appreciate their input, and we look forward to today's discussion. Last Friday, Mr. Chairman, I was pleased to join with you and Mr. Conaway and Mr. Andrews in helping to announce this legislation, and as you noted too, this very important bill officially adds our committee voice to the conversation about reforming the Pentagon system for acquiring weapons. And it's true, it's taken us a bit longer than our Senate colleagues in drafting the measure, but I think we could all agree we wanted to ensure that we had the benefit of feedback from industry, the Department, and members of the Defense Acquisition Reform Panel, and I would certainly argue the resulting bill addresses the most substantive concerns we have heard in that regard, but there's always room for enhancement. And that's why, of course, we've asked our panelists to join us today and help us to perfect what I believe very strongly is already a very good piece of legislation. And as drafted, the bill properly reforms and increases focus on the early stages of the system, requiring the evaluation of alternative solutions at more critical points and independent oversight earlier in the process. Focus on early stage acquisition is vital, as has been stated, and we know from experience the sins which cause cost overruns are very often created in the initial stages of the acquisition process. Mr. Chairman, this bill, as you know very well, makes both organizational and policy changes, and rather than cite them by rote, I would simply refer to my written statement that, with your permission, unanimous consent, I'll have entered into the record in its entirety.
Without objection.
And simply say beyond that, we make use of the existing panel on contracting integrity, which was established a few years ago by this very committee, urging it to make recommendations to minimize organizational conflicts of interest, especially for contractors who provide acquisition support to the Department and who also may compete for future technical work. And as well, the legislation directs the Comptroller General to review the mechanisms DoD uses for considering trade-offs between cost, schedule, and performance, and thereafter make recommendations for improvement in that area. Despite the list of reforms, and they are several, our bill is really relatively narrow in scope. Acquisition workforce issues and acquisition of services have been addressed in prior years' bills and will continue to be considered by our colleagues on the Acquisition Reform Panel, which will carry on with its work, as the Chairman noted, and fulfill its mandate to consider initiatives that might well be addressed by the committee as part of the 2011 National Defense Authorization Act. The only area related to the workforce is the provision which would authorize the award of cash prizes to DoD personnel for excellence in acquisition. I know there are many, including the outgoing Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, who have suggested that additional legislation in this area is not warranted. John Young recently told reporters, and I'll quote, "I just do not think you can mandate a process that will ensure successful defense acquisition. The bottom line," he went on, "is people run programs, not documents or processes," end quote. Secretary also noted and compared acquisition reform to mandating there'll be no more crime. I have to say I find that particular analogy somewhat alarming, but I agree with him. In the end, implementation of sound acquisition policies and maintaining a skilled workforce is probably more important than passing new reforms. Nevertheless, we continue to see poor outcomes that might well have been avoided had there been a stronger, independent voice earlier in the program, and the warfighters had a clearer role in establishing the requirements up front, and that is in large measure what this legislation attempts to do. And indeed, both the Senate bill S-454 and our House bill seek to meet these objectives, and I encourage both members here today and our witnesses to be really open with their questions and concerns. This is the time to make sure we get this important legislation right, and we look forward to working, as we have in the past, with industry, the Department, and our Senate colleagues to enact meaningful reform within the Department of Defense.